Three, two, one, here we go. Rainman's Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also, interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey, everybody, it's the Rain Man with you today. I'm back with one of my favorite guests, Mr. Jim Rickards, and we're here to talk about AI. And it's a very timely subject, and he is an expert in describing how AI is going to impact the world moving forward. So I'm very excited to have Jim on. Before we kick this off, if you're a part of Rain Man's Take, thank you very much. If you're new to the program, I know you're going to love the content. So go ahead and watch this all the way through to the end of the video. That'll help us with the YouTube algorithm, help get the word out, and continue the conversation going. So without further ado, Jim Rickards, welcome. There's a little bit about Jim here. He's the editor of Strategic Intelligence, a financial newsletter, and the best-selling author of The Great Depression, Aftermath, The Road to Ruin, and many more best-selling books. He's an investment advisor, lawyer, inventor, and economist, and has held senior positions at Citibank, Long-Term Capital Management, and Caxton Associates. He has over 275,000 followers on X, and I will drop his Jim Rickards website in the comment section below. You can learn all about Jim. He has also consulted with the DoD and the CIA, among other government agencies. And like I said earlier, Jim is an expert in this subject, and you'll see that when we discuss the book. And if you are interested at all in AI and what the future could hold with AI, I highly recommend this book, which is called Money, GPT, AI, and the Threat to the Global Economy. So, Jim, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to be with you and with your audience.
Why don't we go ahead and start and just kind of give me an idea of why you decided to write the book, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. First of all, you're right about AI. Came up with the idea for the book about a year and a half ago, not long after Chat GPT-4 was introduced and had, I think, 200 million downloads of the app within like 60 days. Was the fastest spreading or uptake of any app ever until that point. So it was all over the news, and since then it's been driving the stock market. We see the stock markets are close to all-time highs. It's daily volatility, but they're close to all-time highs. But so much that has been driven by AI-related stocks. So we know who they are. It's Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Nvidia, Intel, AMD, a few other stocks. Apple, they call it the Magnificent Seven or the Fabulous Five or whatever you want. So you have two vectors of AI. One is AI itself and GPT, which is a part of the AI world, being rolled out and implemented and available for use and kind of all around us. There's no avoiding it on the one hand. On the other hand, the AI narrative is driving stocks to all-time highs. Now, I think my own view is that's a bubble. Obviously, a lot of people disagree. That's a separate debate. We don't have to go through that right now. But the AI narrative in and of itself, regardless of the fundamentals, is taking stocks higher, and then AI is kind of taking over the world. So it's everywhere. One of the points I make in the book is that it's already here. This isn't 5 years down the road, we're going to have to deal with this or see that or whatever. I mean, it'll be around in 5 years. But it's here now. When you open your refrigerator and there's a little message bar that says time to change your water filter, that's AI. I mean, it's monitoring the water filter and when you last changed it, and it's telling you what to do. That's a very simple form of AI, not unusual. It's on the dashboard of your car. People are familiar with Alexa and Siri. That's AI. A lot of people like it. They'll be sitting there with a drink and say, Alexa, turn down the lights, and the lights will go down. And Alexa, change the TV channel, and the channel will change. They may not know that all the Alexas in the neighborhood are talking to each other, and they're putting you under surveillance, and they may call the cops. But that's a separate issue. But it does have the convenience factor that you mentioned. So AI is already here, and AI is very powerful, and it can be very useful. And for example, in the field of medicine and maybe biochemistry, a lot of times you discover new cures for diseases or new medicines by looking at molecular compounds and looking at correlations. If you combine this and this, does it result in a molecule or potential drug that is a treatment for some disease? Well, humans can do that, but it's just slow and tedious, and it proceeds at a certain pace. The computers with AI, because it's not just random, they're targeting things, can do it much, much faster. And there have already been cases of AI programs in biochemistry that have identified molecules that are worth pursuing, that are, take to test and so forth. So that's the good part of it, and I don't dispute that. It's not as I say, it's not a doom and gloom book. I'm not bashing AI. However, there are a lot of dangers, and you don't hear much about the dangers because people want stocks to go up. OpenAI is not going to come out and say, "Oh, by the way, what we're working on here is pretty dangerous." It's almost like a bioweapons lab. You hope nothing leaks, but maybe it will. So, so what I do is I point to some of these dangers, and not to deny the benefits of it, which are real. And I stick in kind of my lanes, which are capital markets and banking on the one hand, and national security, defense, intelligence on the other. So I think I mentioned in passing that this has wonderful applications in engineering and biochemistry and all that. I don't go into that in the book because that's not my expertise, and I'll leave that to others. But I do look at finance, capital markets, banking, and national security. And I point to a number of phenomena, and I never dumb anything down, but I do put it in plain English. I've yet to see a advanced calculus application with a lot of jargon that you couldn't explain in plain English, assuming you understand it. That and you can do that. It's just a good way to communicate with people. So I'll point out like one of the dangers in the stock market. I'm not talking about valuations. I'm just talking about the dynamics of stock market crashes. And people forget in March 2020, the stock market crashed 30% in 1 month. It wasn't the biggest crash in history, but it was the fastest crash of that magnitude in history, 30% in less than 30 days. So these things happen, and they're not that rare. So there's something called the fallacy of composition. And what is that? What it means is that things that make sense for an individual, that would actually be smart moves for an individual, can be catastrophic if everybody does the same thing. So simple example, you're at a football game and, you don't have such a great view. Maybe the guy in front of you is wearing a funny hat or is too tall, whatever. So you stand up. Well, all of a sudden you have a much better view. You're like, great, I can see the game. But what happens next? Well, the person behind you stands up and the person behind her stands up. And next thing you know, 80,000 people are on their feet. Nobody's better off. Nobody has a better view. You're all worse off because you're standing. So the thing that makes sense for an individual, leave aside whether it's selfish or not, that's a separate topic. The thing that makes sense for an individual produces very bad results when it's done at scale. So how does that work in a stock market meltdown, for example? So let's say stocks are crashing. It is like March 2020. Stocks are down 10%, then they're down 20%. And you're trying to decide what to do for you and your family and your wealth. Making money is great, but not losing money is as important as making money. You got to watch the downside. So a perfectly sensible thing for an individual might be, okay, I'm going to sell my stocks, get cash, go to the sidelines, wait it out. And when things turn around, I'll put my big toe back in the market and find a good entry point. That's a smart strategy for an individual. But what if everybody does the same thing? What if everybody is selling? All of a sudden, you have all sellers, no buyers. Markets are not just crashing, they're going straight through the floor. And you're going to blow through circuit breakers on the New York Stock Exchange. And when you blow through 3 of them, they close the markets. And it's a judgment call whether you reopen it anytime soon. I'm not just talking about markets crashing. I'm talking about markets being closed. And for people who say that can't happen, I point out the New York Stock Exchange was closed for 5 months, from August to December 1914, at the beginning of World War I. It was closed for 4 trading days after 9/11. I mean, those things happen. And when that happens, all of your nice, comfortable 401k, IRA stocks that you think you can buy and sell and get cash when you're 70 years old, they turn into private equity. It doesn't mean they disappear. It doesn't mean anyone steals them, but they can't be traded if the exchanges are closed. So there's an example where a smart individual strategy, sell, get cash, go to the sidelines, is catastrophic if you have all sellers and no buyers. Now, in the old days, and not that long ago, as recently as the 90s, there was something on the New York Stock Exchange called the specialist. And the specialist had a privilege and a duty. The privilege was you got to be the only market maker in a particular stock. You might have American Airlines or Exxon, whatever. You were the market maker in that stock, and you got to see the back of the book, not just the best bid and offer, but what was behind that in terms of close. Your duty was to, when needed, to stand up to the market. If you had all sellers, you might have to be the buyer, try to put out the fire a little bit. If you had a buying frenzy, you might be a seller to try to, again, damp it down a little bit. That's gone. That system is long gone. It's all automated. I talked to a friend of mine who's the director of operations on the New York Stock Exchange. I was down on the floor of the exchange with him, pretty tight security, and he turned to me and said, "Jim, don't let anyone tell you there's any liquidity on this floor. There isn't. There's nothing here. We do our jobs, but there's nothing here that's going to stop a panic." So now, but everything I just described has been true for a long time. That's human nature. You go back 5,000 years, you go back to the mid 14th century. I can show you a banking panic in 1342. But the point is, what role does AI play? What AI does? It does two things. Number one, it creates a homogenization, makes everybody do the same thing, and it happens much faster and to a much more accelerated tempo and on a much larger scale. So it takes this aspect of human nature that's been around forever, puts a turbocharger on it, and makes it happen so quickly that even the regulators can't believe what's happening in front of them. With nobody on the other side, all buyers, no sellers, no specialists, nobody. And in past episodes, and there have been some like it, usually what happens is some big name, JP Morgan, Whitney, somebody, goes down on the floor with a big checkbook and says, "I'm a buyer," shoot it in, and, tries to stop the panics. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But we've handed over that decision making to AI. We don't just use it. We've authorized it. Said, okay, in these conditions, you can act autonomously, meaning the machine is autonomous, and just keep selling. And there's nothing to stop it, nothing to break it. So that's one danger. Then you have GPT, which is that's generative pre-trained transformers. But what it means in plain English, GPT is the branch of AI that creates text and pictures, kind of on demand. You had college kids writing their term papers on GPT. I mean, good luck if the professor picks up the mistakes. A separate subject, but so that's going on, and GPT is completely ridden with errors. It's good technology. Like, okay, nice going, but you've used up half the energy on the planet and all the high-speed processors to get like a bad essay, like something you would give a C- maybe in the old days. And people can't rely on it, but they are relying on it. So we're in this world where we've taken, and the way I describe it to people, it's not that AI malfunctions. It won't malfunction. That's the problem. It'll work exactly as intended. But the intention comes from the engineering side, who don't know that much about human nature, don't understand markets, and they can't contemplate exactly the kind of scenarios I'm describing. So, we all remember grainy black and white pictures from the 1930s, a guy, mostly men, in overcoats with fedoras lined up in the rain around the block trying to get their money out of a failing bank. Of course, they're too late. The insiders already took the money. But it's that dynamic at the speed of light with hyperlinear exponents that just happen really, really quickly. So, there's a bank run going on. You get your iPhone out, you tap a couple buttons, wire the money, send it out, text your friend, hey, get out before it's too late. You're not lined up around the block. This is all happening instantaneously. In fact, it's worse than that because they pre-authorized the AI with stop-loss algorithms, and so it could happen in your sleep, where you're selling your stocks and getting out. You're sound asleep, but the computer has taken over. So these are there are other examples, but those are some of the dangers that we see: the fallacy of composition, delegating to automation, and not having any control.
And a couple things you just mentioned, and I love the term that you use for it. GPT is the speed reading plagiarist. I thought that was classic. Yeah. You were just talking about it, and it's a big word for me. So here we go. Anthropomorphize.
Right.
We anthropomorphize a machine, give it almost human characteristics, but right. It's not. And that's what you're saying, is that, are we giving up too much of that power to these machines? And then the next question is with the speed that AI is advancing right now, is that going to just get worse, or will they be able to somehow fit into the development of this a more human emotion, more human characteristics? What do you think about that?
Right. It's a great question. The answer to the first part is yes, we are giving up too much power to the machines. We're over relying on it. But when we anthropomorphize something, what it means is we give it human characteristics, even though it's not human. It's a machine. It's whatever. I mean, there are some harmless examples. Winnie the Pooh is a cartoon bear, but a child reading Winnie the Pooh thinks that Winnie the Pooh is kind of like a person. He's got a nice shirt, walks around, he talks, and he's your friend. That's pretty harmless. In fact, it's a good thing. Let's stimulate imagination. Let's get kids thinking out of the box a little bit. That's a good thing. But that's how anthropomorphize Winnie the Pooh. A child treats Winnie the Pooh like a person. We're now doing the same thing with AI. And by the way, artificial intelligence is a complete misnomer. There is no intelligence. Don't think for a second that there's anything behind AI that bears any close relationship to human intelligence. It's processing power. It's basically all math. It's all math. But what's the interface? It's, again, my old friends, Siri and Alexa and whoever is talking to you on the dashboard of your car. So, and how do they do it? Well, they have very soothing voices. Alexa's a woman, Siri's kind of a little androgynous, but, it's very calming. And I write about this in my book. I have a scenario. The book is nonfiction, but I do have a long scenario to illustrate my points at the beginning, where basically a stock market meltdown along the lines that we just talked about. But I have characters in it, and one guy is a wealthy family office manager. Two other guys are hedge fund managers, but they're master manipulators, and they're crooks basically, and they're trying to trash the market. There's a Chinese cyber hacking unit in Beijing that are basically trying to crash the market. They're not trying to make money. They're just trying to sink the Western financial system. And then there are other, Fed officials and other participants in the whole thing. And the point I make is that there's no mastermind. It's not the case, and this, at least the scenario I give, it's not the case that the market manipulators are talking to Chinese intelligence, or that the Chinese are talking to the Federal Reserve, and nobody's talking to the family. No, none of them are talking to each other, but they are interacting and amplifying what they're doing because of AI. And that, again, the fact that there's no mastermind means it's very difficult to stop. It'll just kind of happen organically. It's what happens in complex dynamic systems. But I also, using AI, I also introduce deep fakes, and people know what deep fakes are. They're not hard to do. There are companies out there they'll do it for you, or you can rent the software. But basically, words and images and voices that sound completely authentic, very difficult to tell, but they're actually, if I give you 10,000 hours of tapes of Jay Powell giving speeches, and I'm sure we could dig that up somewhere, and feed it into one of these deepfake systems, it can create a synthetic Jay Powell, but it looks, walks, talks, sounds, inflection, everything exactly like him. Well, what if you do, a press conference where he's saying, the whole world is expecting him to cut rates, and he said, well, inflation's still out of control, we're going to raise rates. But the whole thing's a deep fake, and you put it out there, the market will react, and then the Chinese pile on, the manipulators pile on, et cetera. So you get these scenarios, even though nobody's in charge, that come out of the environment we're talking about. So we are, by the way, there are some hedge funds that I've talked to some of the operators, proprietors that are right now using AI to pick stocks. And interestingly, they're having some success. In other words, it's like a lot of things. The first couple of people who do it, it could actually work. AI might be better at stock picking than individuals. But the problem, of course, is that everyone follows on. More and more people are doing it. Next thing you know, all the AI computers are recommending the same stocks, and they're going up. And you're back into a bubble territory. You've been led into the same kind of catastrophic outcome that I talked about, even though, again, fallacy of composition. For an individual hedge fund, it might work fine. If enough people start doing it, you're all copying each other. And that really gets to a bigger point, which is that, as I say, AI will do what it's told, but there's no built-in diversity in the cognitive sense. I'm not talking about DEI. I'm talking about, you and I have experience in markets. I'm sure a lot of your listeners do. If you saw a market crashing, you might you might say, maybe it's gone far enough. Maybe it's time to step in and be a buyer, get ready for the turnaround or whatever. You might be right, you might be wrong, but people use that kind of intuition and might help break the trend a little bit. But AI does not. AI actually cannot do that. And AI can use deductive logic. That's where you have, a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. This goes back to Aristotle, very, very crisp. It can be completely wrong result if the premise is wrong, but the logic is good. Inductive logic is basically a lot of examples. You look around, you see a million cases. You say, well, that must be the way it is. Your inference is that that's how things are based on all the cases you see. And that works until somebody goes to Australia and finds a black swan. I've seen them in Adelaide. They're there, but it took a while for the Europeans to get there. So computers, even with the flaws, can use deductive and inductive logic. But there's a third branch of logic called, very few people understand, called abductive logic. It was really pioneered by Charles Sanders Peirce in the 19th century. The thing about Peirce, he was 100 years ahead of his time, so it almost took till today to figure out the guy, because that's how smart he was. But abductive logic, there's a lot you can say about it, but in plain English, it's common sense, it's intuition, it's a smart guess as opposed to a random guess. And here I illustrate this. I have I mentioned national security. I have a chapter in the book on nuclear warfighting. And nuclear warfighting is something I've been studying since the late 1960s. The big brains, the scholars in the field, did most of the work in the late 1950s and the early 1960s. So, it was Roberta and Albert Wohlstetter, Paul Nitze, Henry Kissinger. There were others, but the biggest brain was Herman Kahn. And Herman Kahn identified how a nuclear war would happen. He said, nobody wakes up on a sunny day and says, hey, nice day, I think I'll start a nuclear war. That's not how it happens. It happens through escalation. One side provokes the other side answers back, the first side raises the ante, the other side's see you and raise, and you're going up what Herman Kahn described as the escalatory ladder. You're climbing a ladder to oblivion by each side raising the other side in response. And he said, when that happens, you're on your way to nuclear annihilation. So what's the solution? What's the answer? The answer is, first of all, realize what you're doing, that you are escalating. 2, take a beat. And then 3, climb down the ladder, start to de-escalate, back away from that outcome. By the way, we are on these escalatory ladders in Ukraine and Israel right now. We can debate the wars. That's a separate subject, but you don't have to pick sides. As well, maybe you do personally, but as an analyst, without picking sides, I just see the escalatory dynamic. More and more U.S. weapon systems coming in, more and more Russian responses. Same thing in Gaza, Lebanon, Hezbollah. We all know what's in the headlines. With nuclear powers all around, U.S., Russia, Israel, Iran, maybe not that far away, Pakistan, etc. So this has that kind of dynamic. Now, there have been a number of cases. Of course, we're all familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that was the paradigm. Kennedy and Khrushchev did de-escalate. It got pretty tense, but they did the right thing. But there are 2 cases I talk about in the book in the 1980s. One was the KGB had a very early form of AI. They called it VRIAN. That was just a name for it. But what it did, it took a lot of inputs, and it compared Russia and the Soviet Union at the time, but really Russia, compared Russia and the United States, and it, using GDP and demographics and output and a lot of other things, and computed. They say who's ahead, who's stronger, and what's the gap. They knew that the U.S. would be stronger than the Soviet Union, but they said when the gap gets to be a certain extent, the U.S. is likely to launch a first strike nuclear attack because they'll consider their positions sufficiently superior that they'll survive the attack. And the funny thing, not funny, but it's the case in nuclear warfighting. When you think the other guy's going to attack, you shoot first, because every scholar agrees that the first strike comes out better, even though maybe everyone gets killed in the end. So when the KGB saw this happening, they said, we've got to basically prepare to strike first because we think the U.S. is going to hit us. 2 things happened around that time. One was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Army got a signal from another AI system called OCO, codenamed OCO, that said U.S. missiles are incoming. The U.S. has launched their missiles. They're getting ready to land in Russia, and it gave a launch sign. It said launch. And this is called launch on warning. You don't wait to get hit. You shoot first. Well, maybe you're shooting second, but you don't wait to get hit. His orders were to call his superiors and leave it to them, and they very likely would have launched based on everything I just described. But he had worked on the system. He knew it had flaws, and he took it upon himself to disobey orders and not launch the missiles. But one of the data points he used, he was observing 5 incoming missiles, and he said the U.S. wouldn't shoot 5 missiles. If they were attacking, they'd shoot 100 or 200. They wouldn't shoot 5. Well, it turns out the missiles, it was a funny reflection of the sun off the clouds that got picked up on the radar, interpreted as missiles. It was a computer flaw. But this guy had to basically put his career on the line, maybe his life, disobey orders, risk his country to avoid a nuclear war. He later became known as the man who saved the world. Around the same time, NATO and the U.S. were conducting a war game. And the particular war game was a nuclear attack. We weren't getting ready to attack, but we were simulating that and moving things around, and heads of state were involved, etc. The KGB observed this, but their interpretation was that we were getting ready to launch a first strike. Not that it was a war game, but that it was it was cover for an actual attack. So the Soviet Union then, mobilized, got their missiles ready for launch, got their bombers, warming up their engines on the runways and all that. And it was a U.S. Lieutenant General, General Perutz, who saw this and he said, no, he also disobeyed orders. He de-escalated. He called off part of the war game. He said, let's not play the next move in the war game. Let's de-escalate. KGB picked it up. They said, okay, we'll calm down. And a few months later, it was all over. Now, the point of those stories, Brian, is that these 2 officers, one Soviet Army, one U.S. Army, may have saved the world from nuclear annihilation, but they did it by disobeying orders. They did the opposite of what a computer would tell them to do. And that's an example of what I was talking about: intuition, gut instinct, common sense, and really going out on a limb, and may have saved the world. My point is that AI cannot do that. Not only is it not programmed to do that, that kind of logic, smart guesswork, let's call it, it may be non-programmable. And so if you put an AI computer in the nuclear kill chain, you're just going to get the escalation. You're never going to get the guy who says, time out, wait a second, maybe it's time to climb down the ladder. The computer's not going to do that. So my advice to the Pentagon, I don't know if they're listening, but is do not put AI and GPT in the nuclear kill chain, because you will get that kind of result.
And the book again is Money, GPT, AI, and the Threat to the Global Economy. Obviously, we're talking about both the economy and geopolitics at this point. I guess, and we're kind of got a little bit more time here together. Probably the biggest question I would want to ask you is, are our leaders in Washington right now, are they the type of individuals that would do that in the future? As you're talking about those 2 guys who actually had the courage to say, nope, this is gone way off the reservation. I personally don't. It doesn't look like we've got much in terms of leadership for that. How do you see what would you project the future looking like if something like that were to happen, based on who we have in control right now?
Right. Well, 2 things, Brian. One, at the highest levels, I agree with you completely. I've never, Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, President Biden when he's awake. I've never seen a weaker foreign policy leadership team in my life, and I've been doing this since I was a kid. Basically, I've been interested in foreign affairs since I was old enough to read. So we do have the weakest possible leadership team, number one. Number 2, the neoconservatives, and I would take the people I mentioned, but I would broaden it a little bit. Victoria Nuland, she's out of government now, but she was in until very recently, and many others. John Bolton, Lindsey Graham. They're not all Democrats, by the way. Republicans are chiming in, some of them anyway. they're warmongers. Simple as that. Liz Cheney, they never saw a war they didn't like. It's part of the military-industrial complex that we've come to be wary of, et cetera. So they don't have the nuance or the breaks or the common sense or anything that we just talked about. And they are on a path to nuclear war. I don't think that's an overstatement. When I follow Ukraine. I get reports on the battlefield daily. I follow it very closely, and I see the dynamic where Biden says no, 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 and they says yes. All of a sudden, they've got F-16s. Turns out the Ukrainian pilots don't speak English. All the training's in English. They can't fly the F-16s. They're getting shot down by Russian S-400. And somebody came up with a bright idea. It's like, oh well, the Romanians are well trained. Let the Romanians fly the F-16. Great. Now NATO's attacking Russia. So how far do you want to go? I don't see any constraint. The same thing with Iran and Israel. Nobody's backing down. So we are in those escalatory dynamics that could lead to nuclear war. I think we have a complete absence of leadership. I hope that somewhere in the ranks there are lieutenant colonels and lieutenant generals and others who would do as has happened in the past. That was before AI, by the way. But in the world of AI, there's another phenomenon I talk about in the book. It's called flash war, where the whole dynamic we just described, the escalatory dynamic, where you're supposed to see it, take a beat, go down, etc., that with AI lacking common sense in the kill chain, that things on both sides would happen so quickly that there wouldn't even be time for human intervention. You wouldn't have the time for, Lieutenant General Perutz to come out and say, time out here, let's dial it down a little bit. That would happen in minutes. And by the way, I'm pretty shameless when it comes to plugging my own books. People ask me, what's it like to write a book? I say, well, they're hard to write and they're harder to sell. It's just a task. But I enjoy doing it. I enjoy, opportunities like this to speak to your audience. But there's a book by another author I recommend. It's got a cheery title. It's called Nuclear War by Annie Jacobson. It's bestseller. It's easy to find. I recommend reading it. It will keep you up. It will scare you to death, but it's supposed to. But it's like a 300-page book, very well documented. I know some of the people and places that she tracks, and then she got very many more. Kind of interesting. She got a lot of people who worked on Los Alamos and thermonuclear testing in the 1950s, Bikini Island and Christmas Island and elsewhere, who are today, if they're still alive, they're in their late 80s, early 90s. And it's funny, they've kept these secrets for decades, but it's almost like when you're near death and the thing's 50 years old, you kind of wanted to get it off your chest a little bit. And they told her stuff that is, still classified, but she's fine. She's a writer, and they told her, and she put it in the book. Pretty chilling stuff. But just to boil it all down, the president would have 6 minutes to decide to fire nuclear weapons. 6 minutes, because you see it coming. Is it heading our way? Where did it come from? Is it nuclear or not? Can we shoot it down? Where's it going to hit? There's a whole lot of data and processing and decision making while the missile's in flight, and then it takes time to launch our own missile. So with constraints on both ends, like we got to know what we're doing, but we don't have, but we need time to shoot back. That window where the president has to decide is 6 minutes. So take that, which she documents brilliantly, and combine it with what I'm talking about with artificial intelligence, where you just don't have the common sense, can't put on the brakes. It's a pretty scary world. And again, I'm repeating myself, but the answer is keep AI out of the kill chain, or you're increasing the risk exponentially. And then I have another section on maybe save it for another interview, Brian, but on bias and censorship and what I call confabulation, which is basically just a fancy name for lying. And what's happening? So let's talk about GPT for a second, because that's a branch of AI. So Google rolled out their GPT app a few months ago. It was called Gemini. And, you give it a prompt, which is just a question, and then it will produce an image or a text, or, it'll produce something that you can use in theory. So some user said, GPT, give me an image of a pope, and it came back with images of women in papal vestments and a shaman. And then he said, "Okay, give me an image of a Viking." And it came back with a black Viking, pretty fierce looking, but there are no black Vikings. If you've been to Norway, they're all pale skin blonde, pretty much. And so that's nutty. I mean, I'm not here to debate the role of women in the Catholic Church. We take that to the bar, but I do know there have been 266 popes in 2,000 years, and they were all men. There wasn't one female pope. How does that happen? And the surgery brain comes out and says, "Oh, well, we screwed up a little bit or whatever." No, they didn't. That program did not malfunction. It worked exactly as it was programmed. But here's the point. They were doing something called prompt injection. And what's that? The prompt is the question. So prompt injection is they take your question and they inject other elements into it, in theory, to damp down bias, and then it gives you the answer. So when you say, "Give me an image of a pope," the computer will say, "Give me an image of a pope in a world of DEI where everybody has an equal chance." Well, if you ask that question, you're going to get some female popes and you're going to get some black Vikings. But that wasn't your question. That's a Google engineer trying to reverse a bias that they object to. But all they're doing is they're injecting their own biases and replace the biases that they don't like. And I talked to Gilman Louis about it. He's the number one guy. He's a very long, successful career in Silicon Valley, and equally long, successful career in the intelligence community. He ran In-Q-Tel, which is, people don't know this, but the CIA has their own venture capital firm, which finances interesting things. And Gilman at In-Q-Tel financed one of my AI projects. This is years ago. Like I say, I've been working on AI for a very long time. So that was so we had a relationship that goes back. But I talked to him about this. We were at a conclave in Santa Fe, and we agreed that bias is actually a good thing. It's probably why the human race has survived. If I'm biased, if I'm a Paleolithic hunter, and I'm biased against saber-toothed tigers, that's probably a good thing. I'll probably live longer and be able to feed my family. So biases keep us alive, but there are biases that are repugnant. We all know what they are. Racism, Nazism, and so forth. But when you try to scrub that out of history, you're going to get false answers. You're fooling yourself. We agree. My solution is leave the bad biases in, let them populate the training set because they're there, they're real, and use education, conversation, debate, use those analytical skills, those critical thinking skills to say, yeah, I see it, but it's a bad thing. We need to move on beyond that. That's the way to deal with it. When you try to erase history, you're into George Orwell, you're into 1984, and all you're doing is substituting your bias for the other bias. Who's to say your bias is any better? What makes you the moderator? But the point is, the gatekeepers, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, a few others, and Twitter before Elon Musk took over, but those gatekeepers have been lying to you for 5 years about climate change, masks, fake vaccines, the spread of the pandemic, the war in Ukraine. So why should you take people who have been lying on climate change? Why should you take people who have been lying to you for 5 years and then suddenly trust them when it comes to GPT? You shouldn't. You should be very skeptical of that output. So these are the flaws. These are the dangers. I'm not an AI basher. Like I say, it's here. It's powerful. It'll do a lot of good, but it'll do a lot of harm if people are not attentive to these dangers.
And I think what we're seeing in today's world, and I see it all the time in my circles of friends who consume media for news, and that is they just want an echo chamber. So the fact that those people are biased doesn't really bother them. They don't see beyond their sort of agreement with that to realize that how scary and how dangerous that trend is going to be in the future. And I guess I go crazy thinking about our government and politics, but at the end of the day, it's up to us as the individuals to be that skeptic or to not believe everything you're being told. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And you go into great detail in the book. And like I said before, if you want to learn about this stuff, you describe it in such a way that's very easy for people like me to digest and understand. For the last couple of minutes that we have left here, Jim, now that you talked about the market crashing, the world ending by nuclear apocalypse, let's end on a positive note. Give me some things that us little people can do. And let's just use the market, the scenario of a market crash. Is there anything that we can do kind of to protect ourselves? Because obviously AI is not going away. Is there anything we can do kind of now?
Yeah, I would allocate some of my portfolio, not all of it, maybe a slice, 10%, 20% seasoned to taste, to non-digital assets that will be unaffected by anything in the world of AI. And there could be a lot of things that go wrong. AI, we talked about crash markets, et cetera. There are other things. Governments can use it for confiscation. They can interdict, they can freeze your accounts, et cetera. So have some assets, and I would say gold, silver, land, fine art, the higher end of that market. It's an expensive market. Natural resources. There's a set of assets that are non-digital, can't be hacked, can't be frozen, and will see you through any kind of borderline apocalyptic outcome. But just to give you a concrete case, Brian, Elvira Nabiullina is the head of the Central Bank of Russia. And I always mention her. She's the only central banker in the world who actually knows what she's doing. She put 25% of the Russian reserve position, about $150 billion at the time, into physical gold. It's physical, it's in Russia, it's in safekeeping, etc. When the war in Ukraine expanded after the special military operation in 2022, the U.S. froze $300 billion worth of U.S. Treasury securities that the Russian Federation had purchased legally with their dollar reserves, and they were kept in, most of them in custody in a Euroclear, which is it's like DTC. It's a major European custodian. They have, I think, $40 trillion of assets. The U.S. froze them, and now the U.S. is in the process of stealing them to support loans to Ukraine, to keep the Ukraine war going in a world where Congress won't vote the money. So that's a whole other issue, again, a separate topic. But at least they had 25% of their assets in something the U.S. couldn't freeze. And so their reserve position is solid. They've actually made, because of the geopolitical stress, there's a flight to gold, and the price of gold has gone up 70% in the last year and a half. And so Russia has made $50 billion in profits on their gold because of the blunders and the sanctions of the United States. So we're putting money in their pockets. Yeah. But the point is, she diversified the reserve position, 25% gold, and that is helping Russia weather the storm of sanctions and asset freezes. Individuals can do the same. You don't have to go overboard, but yeah, if you had 10 to 20% of your assets in precious metals, art, land, natural resources, you won't be wiped out if a digital firestorm comes.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good place to stop. And obviously, if we have 2 more 40-minute episodes, we could get past most of the book here, but it is a great book. And again, Jim, I really appreciate your time. And the book again is Money, GPT, AI, and the Threat to the Global Economy. I believe it is out for public consumption on the 12th of November. You can get it anywhere you buy books, both online and in brick and mortar, I'm sure. Let me finish off real quick by saying, if you're in the military, fire departments, police departments, first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. Jim, as always, it was a pleasure. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for watching RAINMAN'S Take, Observations on the World We Live In. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow RAINMAN'S Take on Instagram at RAINMAN'S Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.